All right, next we're going to go through getting into the process of what I call filling your funnel and the sales process around getting investors. It really is a sales process when it comes down to it. There's qualifying, awareness, nurturing, evaluation. Evaluation goes both ways, and closing the deal, just like a sales process. This is not going to be sales 101. I'm using it somewhat as a framework to guide us through what you can expect and how to get ready and manage the process. So the first part is filling the top of the funnel, and how do you go about doing that? This first part is really around marketing and relationship building and brand building. And then the second part is the sales part. How do you convince someone to invest in you? How are they evaluating you? How are you evaluating them? How do you get to a close at the end of it? So there's different investor strategies before you can even start to fill the funnel. Just like a sales process, you want to be clear on what's my strategy. So what kind of funds are you going to raise? And I think it should be noted is it's helpful to think about the strategy, but knowing that your strategy might change as you're going through the process. As Gabe talked about, he first started wanting to raise from VCs and met with a ton of VCs and realized he wasn't getting the right traction there. So he switched strategies and went more of an individual route his first round. The second round, kind of something similar happened where he wasn't quite getting the VC to lead, but he got the strategic to step up to lead, and everything else kind of fell in line. So I'm going to go through kind of the nuances of these strategies. It's helpful to think through how do you plan on going about it, but knowing that it might change as you're out talking to investors. So early on, one of the most common ways to raise capital is from friends and family. Often you as the company will set the terms for that round, how much you're raising, at what valuation, etc. Most likely people won't take a board seat at that round. It's a pretty small round. You might not even have a board early on. I think there's pros and cons to that, not having a board early on as well. Another strategy is the angel/seed round led by the company. So the difference there is you're going to a bunch of angels and saying, I'm raising X money at X percent at this valuation. Oftentimes this will be a lot of smaller angels or angels or individuals coming in to your company. And again, likely at this point they won't have a board seat. The difference starts to be when the angels are the lead investor. And so this is usually when you're getting to the point of working with professional angels. They're used to leading, they're used to setting term sheets, they're used to setting seed round terms. They also have probably more experience to help you get future capital, and they will likely be more hands-on than those angels that are kind of putting the money in, but not professional investors, not as hands-on. This is where you would let the market set the terms of the deal. They're used to putting together market terms, and they would give you a term sheet. What I'm finding is often entrepreneurs want number 3 to be the case of how they raise money. But what they usually find early on is that they revert back to 1 or 2. Where they're having to lead their own terms. I think there's pros and cons of going out trying to get number 3 where you have a lead investor set the terms. Sometimes it can be quicker because they'll take a larger portion and fill your round more quickly. Sometimes you can get more competitive terms if it's competitive in nature. The downside of going that round is early on, you might not find that lead investor to kind of make the move, but you have talked to 10 people that said, well, if you tell me the terms, I'd be happy to invest. And so as an entrepreneur, you just have to make the trade-offs of what route is best for you. Are there questions about those strategies? Go ahead.
One of our investors pointed out that he required friends and family to invest before he would ever invest in the company we had, but because you're much more likely to lose his money than your friends and family's money.
Right.
So you're going to work harder if you've done that first.
I know a couple entrepreneurs that kind of almost as their own integrity. If they're not willing to take their mom's money and risk it and sit around the coffee table with her, they don't feel kind of right taking other people's money. Because, I mean, ultimately, you're responsible to all your investors. There's downsides to that as well. If you lose your family's money, but because not all investors are successful, right? There's added stress in that. But someone that doesn't really know you is kind of looking for that nod of people that knew you were willing to put money into it. And then strategic investors, most of the time too, it depends on if strategic investors have a fund, if they're situated to make investments. If they have kind of a fund within their company, you'll see them leading, taking board seats, etc. If they're not used to investing, they will rely on you as an entrepreneur to set more of the terms for them. So again, it's kind of reading your audience. What kind of investment do they typically do? Gabe talked about trade-offs of strategic investors. Sometimes they can add a lot of benefit. Other times they can get in the way of some of the things you want to get done. So it's important to really evaluate, do I want to take strategic money? I always say go in with eyes wide open of what the pros and cons are. All right, now back to establishing the investor funnel. I'm going to pass this out. Just take one and pass it around. All right, so I'm passing around a template of what I call the investor lead list. And this is similar to creating kind of a sales funnel. I've seen people, get in like Salesforce and use a really complicated sales tracking tool. I found personally, early on, Excel can be just as effective in creating your funnel to manage. And at the top, you're really trying to figure out what investors are actively seeking companies like this. This is like, what is the profile of an investor that you're seeking? And to relate this back to sales terms, it would be kind of like, who's your ideal customer? What are the characteristics of your ideal customer? Kind of apply that same methodology of who's your ideal investor. So it might be, I'm seeking investors that do early stage investing in technology companies, in the insurtech world, who invest pre-revenue in the Midwest. I mean, that's a pretty tight profile of what kind of investor you're looking for. I think that if you do the work to really think about what kind of investor is ideal for you, it helps with filling the funnel. If you're going after coastal VCs versus Midwest VCs, even think about what kind of PR you would want to do. The publications of being in the Des Moines Register is very different than getting a TechCrunch or Forbes article. Just who's reading that is very different. The way that you're trying to build buzz, which conferences you're going to be attending, all of that, having clarity on who is that ideal investor will help you fill your funnel. I really encourage you to get organized with this investor lead list, and it will evolve over time. This is partially who do you want to target, but then as people are expressing interest in you, if you start to get calls from investors, that you start to take detailed notes on who are you talking to, what are they saying, what stage do they invest in, because they might not be a good fit for you today, but the next round they might be a good fit. There's a lot of different tools in order to find investors that might be ideal for you. There's online platforms like Crunchbase, PitchBook. There's a lot of public lists. If you just Google kind of the segment or the sector that you're in, these are a couple examples of investor lists that are out there of who's investing at what stage and in what companies. We also have included 3 to 4 pages of local, when I say regional investors. So these are the regional syndicates in the Midwest. These are state angel groups that invest as groups. These are surrounding state angel groups. There's also micro VC funds that invest early on.
Which, by the way, I want to point out that just to make it even cloudier, I've got people calling themselves seed/micro VC. We're mixing them together, so
Yeah.
figure out the money fits, don't worry about the name.
Cool.
So we've done some initial work of like, if you're in the Midwest, even if you're not in the Midwest, these are the groups in this area that are making investments.
Sure. But can you comment on how we should be thinking about fund size as we evaluate potential investors?
Yes. It's a qualification metric that I would use. And I'm seeing the funds being set up differently. This is where the trend is changing, where they might have a $100 million fund. It usually is an indicator of that they do earlier size. The smaller the fund, usually the earlier stage that they're investing.
Okay.
The larger the fund, the more capital they're looking to deploy, so they usually do larger investments. But that's not always necessarily the case. Because sometimes they take that large fund and then create like a little micro fund within their VC. And they would say, oh, talk to the seed stage people within our VC. So I just do your research on, do they have a subset? If not, they're probably not doing super early. If they're not talking about it on their website, they're probably not doing it. Or you're the exception to the rule. All right, so once you really give it some thought and who is your ideal investor, then you can go about filling the top of the funnel. And so how do you do that? Some strategies around PR, participating in pitch competitions where you might be getting in front of investors, attending conferences where you have the opportunity to speak. You also can network and meet people, but if you can get in front of people via speaking or conferences, it's a helpful way to start attracting potential investors to you. Finding other CEOs who have connections to these investors. If there's investors that you have as like kind of an ideal investor, see if you can start to network and meet the companies that they've invested in. An introduction from a CEO or someone that they already know is going to have more weight in their inbox than just a random email. Sometimes attending accelerators can also help to build awareness on your company. For those that are from the Global Insurance Accelerator, you'll have a demo day where they work to market you as companies to potential investors at that demo day. And then just long-term building relationships, reaching out to investors and building those relationships. Similar to, I think Gabe had an interesting strategy where he reached out to him and said, hey, can I do a pitch to you? I know you're not my ideal investor. And then that opened the door to probably 5 to 10 introductions for him. So thinking strategically, just like as you think about how would I get in front of my customer that I'm trying to sell to, selling to an investor is no different. Like strategically, how do you get in the door?
Just on the pitch competition piece, there's a lot of free money out there that doesn't necessarily have to go against your equity. So get a chance to refine your message and free money if you do it well. So that's pretty lucrative.
Yeah,
and then,
absolutely.
Things like Entrefest and Cedar Rapids coming up. Just ways to get out there and see other people do it and mingle.
Absolutely. I think the more you have visibility, the more success you're going to have. Sitting in a room behind your computer, cold emailing investors all day long is probably not going to be successful as finding ways to strategically place yourself out in the world. Also, as part of that, this entire process of showing traction, building momentum, everyone wants to invest in kind of the hot thing. So how are you continuing to build that momentum throughout the sales process? All right, then as you work to narrow your funnel, some things to really look at are what are their fund size? Jake, one of your questions of, usually if they have less than 100 million fund size, they're more interested in the early stage. Another question I would ask an investor is what's their check size? So I think it's helpful to start to pin investors down onto like what is their ideal investment. So you're qualifying them as they're qualifying you. If they normally only write a $5 million check and you're raising 500K, they're probably the wrong audience for you to be spending a ton of time with. because the likelihood of them writing a small check when they normally write $1 million to $5 million is going to be a hurdle for them to overcome. They kind of have a sweet spot. Do they lead or do they not lead? Another important question for you to work on qualifying and narrowing who would actually be good investors for you. Who's the decision maker? Who's the ideal person to talk with within their fund? Some of these larger firms have analysts who are kind of combing the market, doing a lot of introductory calls, but the analyst hasn't, I should say this carefully, doesn't have a lot of weight in the final decision. Their job is essentially to find deals and pass them on to partners. So figuring out, who is the ideal person as you're working through the process that has influence within the firm. And then for you qualifying them, what's the word on the street? Are they good investors to work with? Are they good angel investors to work with? What kind of value can they bring you? I would also say qualifying them by talking to other entrepreneurs who've taken their investment. Not all investors have a good reputation, and as much as they're doing diligence on you, you should also be doing diligence on them. The evaluation goes both ways, so they're evaluating you on what's your team look like, what's your market size look like, do you have a strong business model, do you have that competitive moat, are there any red flags that they're finding in your company? Jake?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to tie back on competitive moat, and when we were talking about the pitch deck earlier, competitive advantages, are those essentially the same thing, or when we think about the moat here, and as we're talking to investors after the pitch or whatever, is that a separate topic to address?
I think it's a storyline throughout your pitch and ongoing conversations is what increases your likelihood of success compared to someone else, and how are you getting ahead and how are you protecting what you've built? Is it some secret sauce that's not public? Is it your strategy and key early on partnerships that really give you 2 years advancement on anyone else that did it? For us, when I was at Douala, one of our competitive kind of moats was we found strategic partnerships that allowed us to come to market without all the state licenses. So people were investing $50+ million in these state licenses, and we were able to bypass that through very strategic relationships. We saw that as really a key competitive moat to how we got to market.
Could I just following up on what Jake just said? So the competitive advantage page in the pitch deck is not your competitive advantage to all the different companies that were in the fourth sector comparison. It is how you will build a moat so that if I build Facebook and Jay builds Facebook tomorrow, why my Facebook will be successful and not his?
I think that's a good way to think about it. Yeah, because one is how am I going to compete and who's all in the landscape? And then the other is how am I going to set myself apart to win? Why do I think I'm going to win compared to if someone else tried to do exactly the same thing?
Okay.
Sometimes people are I'm just going to raise a ton of money and I'll execute. But that's not always your competitive moat, right? But investors are really trying to protect their risk, what stops someone else from going and doing what you did. All right, so that's, as you think about kind of the getting investments, getting to a close, having this lens on running it like a sales process, just like you would run a typical sales process. And I think the more strategy and framework you can put around it, the more successful you'll be. Because it's almost like you're wanting to line up a bunch of horses and get the winning horse to the end. And if you aren't lining up the horses, i.e. you're not kind of running this strategy of getting investors all at the end, you can just spend a lot more time. You don't have the sense of urgency. You don't have the sense of choice. You don't have a timeline that you're driving everyone towards. Just like most of the most successful sales team, they have kind of some sense of urgency. Is it a quota? Is it I have to hit this quarter numbers? Someone saying I have to get to a point of closing. figure out what that point of closing is for you and sense of urgency that helps you drive the close.
Is
Trevor.
there a time of the year that's like better to raise capital?
Oh, I feel like I've read some blog about this. Off the top of my head, no. I would say holidays can be super challenging. November, December can be super challenging because just investors' availability can sometimes go down. The counter argument of depending on who you're raising from, they actually might have more time because they're not actively like hustling a ton of deals. So if you happen to hit them, there might be an advantage. I think having the illusion of, oh, they're not doing anything November, December, I'm gonna hit it hard January. I think a lot of people have that mindset, so you might get caught up in everyone hitting it hard in January, right? I would say holidays can be challenging to work around of just what's the follow-up and what's the sense of urgency. But for every argument you can make against one time, I think you can make a counter argument that you could use that to your advantage. It's just thinking through the dynamics, right? Of not being frustrated of like, we had some strategic investors that had very strong European presence. Well, they don't work in August. I mean, that's just reality. So if it's your sense of urgency to get something done in August, you should probably just realize that Europe doesn't have the same sense of urgency. They're kind of on holiday, most of them.
Your whole continent.
Yes.